Listeners, readers, I'm so glad you've tuned in. Welcome to the Fox page, where we dive deep into the very best books. We end up with a richer understanding of the text at hand, all while learning to read everything a little better. I'm Kimberly Ford, best-selling author, one-time adjunct professor at Berkeley, editor, and PhD in literature. And for anyone out there who doesn't exactly traffic in rare books, Foxed page might be something of a mystery, but foxing are simply those little tan dots that you sometimes see on the pages of really old, beloved books. Today, I'm really excited to dive into Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. As always, the lecture will be delivered in 3 chunks. The first chunk, we will talk about why I think it is that you should read this book. It's such a gripping and such an important tale right now. It's very timely. It's a real page turner. There are lots of things that recommend it. We'll then talk briefly about Kiley Reid's biography, and then we'll dive into the book to start talking a bit about the prose. In the first section, there will be no spoilers. In the second and third chunks, though, we might be talking about some of the plot points. So you might want to finish up the book before you listen to parts 2 and 3. In those parts, we'll dive even more deeply into what makes this book unique and why I think it really deserves our attention. Okay, can't wait to get started. This book was recommended by a friend who was really impressed with the way that Reid was able to tackle really, really large, important questions in a book that's a real page turner and a book that is not difficult to read. It's really very pleasing and very entertaining and really, really well done while tackling some really difficult issues. It was a bestseller, which, as many of you know, that tends to be a little bit, for me, a little bit of a warning that perhaps the prose isn't going to be quite at the level that I really like to dig into. And yet I found, aside from a couple of little detractors that we will talk about in the third installment of this lecture, I really was impressed by so much of the prose. So we're going to look very first at the title. And cover art is something that a writer generally has very little control over. This is a cover that didn't actually really speak to me. It was chaotic, and I still don't fully understand what exactly is happening here. But I like the colors, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that bright blue. But I do really, really love the title. It's a comment. This idea of such a fun age is a comment that others can make. And generally, it's in reference to a small child. Oh, it's such a fun age. When they're 3 or when they're 6 months old or whatever the thing is. And sometimes it's a comment from other people. They say, "How old is the baby?" And you say 11 months, and they say, "Oh, that's such a fun age." Or, sometimes it's on the part of a parent themselves. They say, "Oh, 11 months old, it's such a fun age." But what I like about that, and what I like about the idea of the title in that context, in that social dialogue context, is the idea of how superficial that is. So most mothers of children who are kind of young enough to have this comment be made, I think part of it is that it sounds like a preverbal child. If your kid's 9 years old, I'm not sure anybody's going to say, "Oh, that's such a fun age." It tends to be younger children who you can sort of talk about over their heads. But it sort of feeds this superficiality. It's kind of one of these platitudes that you hear as a parent. And it's kind of like when people would say, like, "Oh, it goes so fast," or "savor these moments," or, it'll fly by, which I always wanted to just throttle anyone who said that to me, because parenting young children was very difficult. And yes, there were, of course, fun ages, but I also found that every single age came with a whole host of difficulties. I also love this idea of such a fun age as referring to a much wider age, sort of like an era or an epoch. So, in this case, we're talking about, the 2000 teens. 2019 is when the book came out, so it would have been, some period relatively close to that. So this idea of that time, that period in time as being such a fun age, meaning such a fun era, in the history of our country and in the history of the world. And you think about the politics of the age, and you think about climate change, and you think about the media, and it is in lots of ways not a fun age. So there's this idea of that nuance. I also really like the idea of such a fun age as referring to the middle age and some of the crises that we see. I don't even know how I'm going to say her name. Alix? Maybe we say Alix. I think that's what we say. We're going to talk about that scene when Amira is trying to explain the name to Kelly, because it is absolutely masterful. But this there are lots of ways that Alix is sort of she's not aging particularly gracefully. She's not physically, well, maybe not that either, but there's a sense of fighting age and fighting middle age, which she is moving into, and her husband is firmly already there. And then you have also, I think, a very real and very instructive and interesting and sort of intimacy creating vision of the 20s, meaning somebody's 20s. So for Amira, she has friends who are sort of very quickly outstripping her in terms of profession, and she's very conflicted about, really enjoying this job that she's doing, but understanding that she should have more ambition, and that there's a certain amount of family pressure from her crafty family to do something that's a bit more meaningful. And there's a sense of her as being very, in some ways kind of childlike and not wanting to move beyond, the age when you're just a babysitter. And then, adulthood. And a lot of what her relationship with Kelly, there's a lot of reference to the fact that when she's really enjoying being with Kelly, that it feels like the most adult thing she's ever done. So there is this way, again, he's older than she is. So there's this idea of being in your 20s, but sort of straddling this kind of youth and maturity. And in many ways, I think, both middle age and the 20s are presented as being really fraught in lots of ways, which I love. So such a fun age, I think, has all of those different valences. And it's, I think, a really, really strong title. Okay, the next thing that you notice as soon as you open this book here is the number of blurbs. I mean, you've got this kind of cool page at the front that has all of the I don't know, the best books of the year list and that stuff. And then very quickly you go through literally page after page after page. I don't think I've ever seen this many pages of blurbs. And I like that. I think it's perhaps a bit overdone. And some of these are big, huge paragraphs. I like to look at who the people are. And if I'll recognize another author who I like, then I'll definitely read that blurb. But I did not read all of these different blurbs. There's one from Madeline Miller in here that was interesting to me. There's one from Jess Walter, who wrote a book that I like to refer to as Beautiful Ruins, although it's really just, I think, called Beautiful Ruins. But different people are having different positive things to say. I do think it's a bit of a flex, for them to have these 8 pages of blurbs. But it does speak to the popularity and the timeliness and the sort of way that Kiley Reid has really struck something important that people are really valuing. Okay, we then come to the dedication for Patricia Adeline Olivier. So you guys know that I am a bit of a literary sleuth. I'm also a bit of a literary groupie. So I like to do research. I literally couldn't find honestly, I did not work that hard at this, but I did not find anything. I don't think Kiley Reid lives with her husband in Philadelphia. I don't know that she has children. Part of me wanted this to be like the babysitter that Kiley Reid is using. And I don't think that's the case, because I don't think she has children, but I do not know who this person is. So I'm so sorry to disappoint, but I have literally nothing to say here about this dedication. Okay, about the next part though, the epigraph, I do have something to say. So I love this this beginning with this book about the anxiety of affluence. There is, this is really pointing us in the direction of satire. So there are lots of approaches to satire in literature, in television, in all sorts of different media. But the thing that I think that Kiley Reid does so well is there is really a poignant satire here. It is a satirical novel, but she also does a very good job of making the characters round so that there isn't a kind of straw man. She's not creating a type who is just immediately identifiable as someone that we all hate. Instead, she's giving us these images of people who, yes, we sort of hate them, but we also, we understand a little bit, or we're sympathetic in certain ways to them, or they have aspects of their personality. I'm thinking of Kiley here, who is really, ends up being pretty repugnant. And yet he's someone who in lots of ways makes Amira, our main character, feel good, and he's funny and sort of sweet in different ways. He just happens to have some major flaws. Okay, so we have this kind of absurd mother who's really grappling with this idea of how much her daughter deserves an ice cream cone. And I do think I like the absurdity of it, because it's clearly not a problem. It's just not a problem. This is not a problem. I mean, this is a certain type of mother that I think is just very easy to kind of lampoon and easy to satirize. And it speaks to this idea of affluent people problems. I mean, it's a pretty stark vision of the kind of parent that we think we are going to find in Alix, and in fact we do find in Alix. And then we come to part 1. The novel is divided into 4 parts. It's not very, the structure, which is something we're going to look at in the second lecture, the structure is really well done, and there are lots of interesting things she's doing with it. But the division into 4 parts, there's one part that's kind of interesting. You have a nice, there's a moment when one part ends and then another begins, and it's very significant. But the structure in terms of those 4 parts is not as complicated as some of the work that Kiley Reid is doing between the paragraphs. So it's time to dive on into the text. So we're going to look at 2 beginnings now. Usually when I am beginning a novel and a lecture with you all, the advice is to look very carefully at the opening paragraph, the opening sentences, especially in a more challenging text. It can really help you understand the language and understand where your focus might be, and it will set up expectations that I think are really, important to bear in mind as you move forward. In this case, because we have these narratives that are told, essentially the experiences of the 2 women, Alix and Amira, are given sort of equal weight. And I love what Kiley Reid is doing with this narrative voice. So it's essentially the free indirect style, or also known as like a close third narration. So when she is narrating, you can think of it as, somebody who has like a GoPro on, where everything is told from the perspective of a person. And that person at times is Amira, and we have access to her thoughts and feelings and what she is seeing and doing. And then at times it is Alix and what she is thinking and doing, and what her world looks like. So I really like this. And what I want to do is look briefly at the opening scene for Amira, and then also at the opening scene for Alix. So if you'll note that I'm wearing this hideous white polo shirt, I'm wearing it in a nod to the sort of uniform that Amira ends up wearing, that ends up being kind of an important plot point. And just a little shout out here to the fact that wearing a white polo shirt, hers has the let her talk, or let her speak, I think, logo on it. So there's a real irony there in the fact that, let her speak is this kind of commercial venture on the part of Alix, and it's all about gaining, beauty products and bottles of wine and asking for what you want, when what you want is a lot of material goods. And there is an irony, of course, because at the end of the novel, it is Amira who speaks, and Amira who really does find her voice, but it's a voice that has been stifled on the part of Alix throughout much of the text. So there we have the polo shirt. Okay, on page 3. That night, when Mrs. Chamberlain called, Amira could only piece together the words, "Take Briar somewhere and pay you double." Okay, so this is, I love this as a beginning. So we have Mrs. Chamberlain, and it is important that she is Alix Chamberlain, because it's an important plot point where Kiley is concerned. But this idea of right from the start as setting up this hierarchy, you have Mrs. Chamberlain. It's also such a gross name. Oh my God, I'm sorry if your last name is Chamberlain. It's so kind of blue blood. It's not gross. I should not say it's gross, but because of who she is and the ridiculous idea of changing her name from Alex to something kind of unpronounceable and kind of effete and strange together with Chamberlain, it's just such a statement. And but then you have, you know, Mrs. Chamberlain, and then you have Amira. It's also Mrs. Chamberlain, not Ms. Chamberlain, which I think is interesting because it's very much, you know, putting a certain amount of weight on the marriage. That Mrs. Chamberlain, you know, she's married to this television personality who's 8 years older than she is. And so you have this sense of her status as a married woman and as lots of other things, including affluent, and a sort of former New Yorker who doesn't want anyone to know that she's from Allentown, Pennsylvania. You have this sense that comes all kind of wrapped up in this excellent name. And then Amira, of course, we only have as the first name. So you have right away, you have this hierarchy. And this idea of Amira piecing together these words. So Alix, I'm cringing every time I'm saying that. Alix has made a whole business venture out of writing letters and of sort of speaking her piece. And yet here we have her trying to communicate with Amira, and Amira's trying to piece together these words, and it's not working very well. Also, what she ends up saying is significant. Take Briar somewhere and pay you double. There is this sense of, right from the jump, we get this sense about Briar as being sort of her mom constantly pushing her toward Amira in a way that becomes a very important aspect of the novel. It's not clear to us yet why, but that idea really does manifest in a powerful denouement at the end of the novel. But at this point, we're just getting a sense of her sort of needing Briar to be away. Briar also, I mean, forgive me if you have a child named Briar or if your name is Briar. It just seems so absurd to me. I mean, it just seems so like weirdly country clubby and kind of just not great. I mean, I don't know. It's personal taste, but Briar Chamberlain, it sounds like, ugh. Anyway. And this pay you double, right away, the importance of money and the transaction at hand is really highlighted in this very, very first part. Okay, and I'm going to read relatively quickly through the rest of the paragraphs on this page. In a crowded apartment and across from someone screaming, "That's my song," Amira stood next to her girlfriends Zara, Josefa, and Shani. It was a Saturday night in September, and there was a little over an hour left of Shani's 26th birthday. Amira turned the volume up on her phone and asked Mrs. Chamberlain to say it again. "Is there any way you can take Briar to the grocery store for a bit?" Mrs. Chamberlain said. "I'm so sorry to call. I know it's late." It was almost astonishing that Amira's daily babysitting job, a place of pricey onesies, colorful stacking toys, baby wipes, and section dinner plates, could interrupt her current nighttime state. Loud music, bodycon dresses, lip liner, and red Solo cups. But here was Mrs. Chamberlain at 10:51 p.m. waiting for Amira to say yes. Under the veil of two strong mixed drinks, the intersection of these spaces almost seemed funny. But what wasn't funny was Amira's current bank balance, a total of $79.16. After a night of $20 entrees, birthday shots, and collective gifts for the birthday girl, Amira Tucker could really use the cash. I love this opening. So I love this idea of Amira Tucker. We learn her last name at kind of the end of this thing, and it's associated with this economic need, and that economic need is really one of the drivers of the book. It has quite a bit to do with how everything kind of shakes out in the end, but it is also it's just such a good depiction of how real these things are. She has a job, but she doesn't have. In fact, she has two jobs, but she doesn't have health benefits, and money is always a concern, even among her close girlfriends, just because of the disparity in how they are living their lives. I do have a little quibble in the beginning here. I think that Kiley Reid, I'm a huge fan of well-chosen detail, and I'm also a big fan of Aristotle's rule of three. So there's this idea in aesthetics, whether it is poetry or visual things, of three of something being particularly pleasing to the human psyche. Again, this is handed down from, antiquity. So, if you're arranging flowers in a vase, three is always better than two. And if you're going to give an example, a series of details, in order to flesh something out, it's usually best to have three things. So I love the idea of that, and I think that well-chosen details can make a huge impact in a novel. But I do think that Kiley Reid overdoes it a bit, and we have these series of things, which I think it's a nice nod to kind of the consumerist world that both of these women are operating in. But sometimes the kind of profusion of it ends up feeling a bit, I don't even know what, it just ends up feeling like a little fragmented or a little laundry listy. And in this very beginning, I like how she has these parenthetical phrases and then she has these lists of things. And they're very telling and they're very well chosen. But there is, and she's obviously, this is a trope that she's using. This is a thing that she's going to lean on because she's setting it apart grammatically and she's repeating these two worlds. It's very instructive and it is well done. But again, I think at some points it gets to be a bit heavy-handed. Okay, and then I want to look next at, and this is the last thing that we're going to do today, is to look at page 20. So we have the introduction of the two of them, and that it's very much in Amira's point of view. Amira is at the party, Amira is getting the phone call, Amira is with her friends. We're deeply in Amira's point of view, her perspective. But then on page 20, at the beginning of chapter 2, I like this clarity here. We have chapter 1 that's from Amira's point of view, and now we're moving to chapter 2, which is from Alix's point of view. So, and honestly, this first paragraph in chapter 2, it is on page 20, just really says it all. It hardly needs much commentary. Between 2001 and 2004, Alix Chamberlain sent over 100 letters and received over $900 worth of merchandise. I mean, right from the start, like this woman's priorities are, making money and saving money and cultural, accumulation of material goods. These free products included coffee beans, Luna bars, makeup samples, scented candles, putty to hang posters on the walls in her dorm room, magazine subscriptions, sunscreens, and face masks, all of which Alix shared with her roommates and the other girls on her floor. While she majored in marketing and minored in finance, Alix did product reviews for a student newspaper during her sophomore and junior years at NYU. In her senior year, she quit the newspaper to become a beauty intern at a tiny publication, but she didn't stop sending letters. On thick, textured stationery with a dreamy cursive handwriting, Alix asked nicely for the things she wanted, and it became a rare occurrence when she didn't receive them. So you have it's this you have this different language here. In the beginning with Amira, we're very close to her, and we have right in the moment she's receiving this phone call. Everything is chaotic. It just very nicely kind of mimics the sort of the slightly out of control, unstructured way that Amira is living her life. In contrast to this introduction here of Alix, I don't know how we say her name. Nobody seems to know. We have this really great introduction of her in this voice that's very orderly, it's very distanced, it's very matter of fact, it's very, sort of clear, and it is all about money and getting what you want. Literally, if she asks for something, she tends to get what she wants. So, and then of course this becomes this whole let her speak thing, which is just, I think, a really good use of satire, because you have this idea, let her speak really seems like it should be something political, and yet what her let it speak comes down to is essentially that you can ask for anything you want and get it, and largely what you want is going to be material goods. So these sort of dual introductions, these two different introductions to Amira and to Mrs. Chamberlain. In the second installment of this lecture series, we will be talking about structure and narrative stance, All the while, of course, we will be looking at the prose and what makes it so excellent, and we will be discussing ways that you can read more deeply and more sort of strategically and more in a way that's more satisfying to you. And then in part 3, we're going to be talking about satire and how satire manifests itself in this novel. We're going to talk about a little bit more about some of the things that I think Kiley Reid isn't doing quite as well as maybe she will be doing in subsequent novels. And then we're going to look at the close of the novel and some of the plotting that is really masterfully done, and that provides this kind of really exciting climax and denouement at the close of the novel. So definitely join us for parts 2 and 3 of this lecture, and thank you for joining me. Listeners, readers, welcome to part 2 of the 3-part lecture on Kiley Reid's incredible Such a Fun Age. During this second part of this 3-part series, we are going to be taking a look kind of briefly at the structure of the novel, and then taking a slightly deeper dive into how the structural elements of the novel allow for something called dramatic irony, which is really something that Kiley Reid does very well. So, and of course, the entire time we will be taking a close look at the prose and sort of picking apart why the prose works so well and why Kiley Reid's book is both such a page turner and also a book that really tackles in a very graceful way and in a very deep way some really important questions. So we're going to dive in to this notion of structure. In part 1, we took a look at the beginnings of chapters 1 and chapters 2. And we did that because the first one is very much from Amira's point of view, and then chapter 2 is very much from Alix's point of view. I'm just gonna smile to myself every single time I say that. Oh, and for those of you who are opting for a slightly more immersive experience and are watching the video on YouTube of the lecture, you can see that I'm wearing a black leather jacket because I loved that notion of the black leather jacket as being something that was almost like some sort of armor for these young women, and whereas Mrs. Chamberlain has all sorts of material goods and all sorts of wealth and gets what she asks for if she just simply writes a letter. For these young women, the idea of having a black leather jacket is really a very big deal, and it's very satisfying when Amira finally gets hers. So back to the structural part. If we have Amira at the beginning and then we have Alix, and that structure is going to continue. So they're alternating chapters, which are great. One of the things that I think that Kiley Reid does very well with this structure, in addition to this very sort of clear toggling back and forth between the two women's perspectives, is she does this nice thing where there's some sort of overlap. There's some sort of, it's almost like a nesting that's kind of happening with some of the timing. So she's able, because of this kind of overlapping temporal quality, to move back and forth in time in a way that is very satisfying. But what I think is done very well are a little later as things are heating up, and we literally have the overlap in time where the worlds are actually colliding. So, for example, in chapters 12 and 13, we're going to take a look at page 147. So this is the beginning of chapter 12. On Thanksgiving Day at 4:06 p.m., Amira stepped out of a yellow cab in beige faux suede boots. Kelly held the back of her arm as she spotted previously made footprints in the snow on the way up to the Chamberlain front gate. Okay, one quick thing. I don't know why Kiley Reid has all of these specific times. It's funny. To me, it was like an unnecessary detail. There's a writing adage that you need to think of your reader as like someone who's wearing a backpack, and every detail that you are providing the reader is like a rock that they're putting in their backpack. And there's an expectation that comes with that, along with the weight of carrying all of these details. So this idea of giving us precise times felt like something that I didn't want to have to keep track of. And it heightened my sort of my guard. Your guard goes up a bit because it sounds like some sort of like criminal testimony, or it sounds like you're giving exactly precisely where things were. It sounds like something terrible is about to happen on some level, because you have this idea of precision that might come in some sort of a forensic report or a forensic investigation. But in this case, what I love is this idea of Amira and Kelly as arriving, and then you hear a bit more. If we go down to the bottom part of the page, I want to read this because it's we're going to talk in the third section about satire, but I just think this is a very good example of the mastery with which Kiley Reid, writes dialogue. And this is one of those examples of really seeing kind of the charming aspects of Amira and Kelly's relationship, which is very important so that there is a reason why Amira is with him. So kind of in the middle of page 147, again, we're right still at the beginning of chapter 12. "Hey, do we need a code word or something?" she said. Kelly stuck his hands into his pockets and matched her low tone. "A code word for what? If you're not having a good time and you want to leave." "Oh, okay, how about I don't want to be here anymore?" Amira shoved his chest and opened the gate. "Boys, stop. We'll be fine. I'm happy to be here," he said. So there's this sense of the two of them preparing to come in. And then we have chapter 13, where we have jumped back in time just a tiny bit. Alex checked herself in the mirror. She wore a deliciously chunky oatmeal-colored sweater over tight jeans and brown boots. She walked down, which of course she's checking herself in the mirror. I mean, this is like, this is someone who's very superficial and is concerned about the way things appear. She walked downstairs with Catherine in her carrier. She whispered to Tamra, "I think she's here." And then as she swung the door open, she stepped back and tapped herself 15 years into the past. In front of her stood both a grown man and a high school junior, and this person that embodied them both was saying "Alex" as if he knew her. So I love the nuance here. So one of the things that's so great is we have, the kind of the calm and the poise and the good energy that Kelly and Amira have when they're arriving. And then here we have Alex, who is, being superficial, and she's favoring her daughter Catherine over Briar. And she's, checking herself in the mirror, and she's, feeling very self-congratulatory. She's excited about Amira coming, largely because she wants everybody to see that she is, just like family with this employee who happens to be a young Black woman. And then, of course, we have this kind of slap in the face. And I love this idea here. The person who is embodying both the grown man and the high school junior was saying "Alex" as if he knew her. So I love that, because we do know that they know each other. I mean, they were sexually involved in a way that was significant for her, because it was the first of many things. But this idea "as if he knew her" really underscores the fact that this is a very superficial relationship, and they really don't know each other. So it's that nice balance in a very kind of subtle textural way here, meaning in the text, where we have this idea of them knowing each other, but in fact not knowing each other at all. I also like the way that at the end of chapter 12, so we see at the beginning of chapter 12, we have Amira and Kelly arriving. At the end of chapter 12, we have the reveal that, in fact, Kelly is, ringing the doorbell. And then we have part 3. So we have this nice division. Part 3 is divided. It's a single moment in the story. It's not like time has passed or anything, but it's a big enough event that it is as if it is cutting the book into different parts. So I really liked that structural element. Okay, so now we're going to go on and take a look at one of the things that the structure of the novel enables is something called dramatic irony. So dramatic irony, it comes mostly from the stage, from drama. This idea that an audience or a reader knows something that the cast or the characters in the fictional work don't know. And it's a really, it can be a bit heavy-handed, and so you have to tread carefully, but I think Kiley Reid does a very good job with it. The fact that these two women, Amira and Alix, are in this position with this guy it lends itself to this idea of dramatic irony. So I think it's very, very well done. We're going to take a look at a few times that when dramatic irony, these are very good illustrations of it too, if you're not totally clear on the concept. And it's also a very good example of how dramatic irony can really heighten tension for the reader, and it can really heighten a sense that, things are not going to be great once everybody's worlds have collided. Okay, we're going to look at page 94 first. Down at the bottom, this is when Amira and Kelly are drinking the wine together, and they're discussing how good the wine is. And Amira says, "Do you think your high school girlfriend is drinking this in first class right now?" So it's such an amazing moment because Kelly has just said his thing about, which is a total misconception, about how he had this issue with his college and with his high school girlfriend because she was the richest kid in town, and she was so entitled that she wouldn't even put her own suitcase up into the overhead bins, when in fact that had happened because Alix back then had not known that that's what you needed to do, because she had literally never been on an airplane before. So it's a really important moment. We know that from before, and the fact that Kiley Reid is sort of reiterating, she's returning to this moment, that's really an important piece of our understanding of Kelly and Alix's relationship. So we have Amira alluding to it in this way, when she says, "Do you think your girlfriend is drinking this really nice wine in first class?" As the reader, you're like, ooh, probably not in first class, but she is probably drinking some white wine that's probably pretty great right around the corner. So there's that sense of, as the reader, you know something that in this case, neither of these people know. So Amira and Kelly have no idea that Alix is significant for both of them, but as the reader, you do. So it's this delicious sense of really being on the inside and kind of being in collusion with the author, which is always a good feeling. It also heightens the tension, of course. You know that, like, wow, like we're close to these things, these worlds colliding, and when they do, it is not going to be great. Okay, we're going to look at 148. This is another good example of this kind of dramatic irony. Right at the top of 148, and this is when they're going to the Thanksgiving. Kelly stood next to her, so holiday handsome, in dark jeans, a red sweater, and a black coat that went down to his knees. They'd spent the last 24 hours together at his apartment, having lots of sex, watching bad movies, and ordering in. And Amira felt more like an adult than she could have ever imagined. She looked up at him and whispered, "I feel weird using my key." It's significant that it's the sort of impending doom is linked up in this case with the last 24 hours, which have been great. And again, we have this idea of Amira feeling like an adult. And as the reader, part of the dramatic irony is you understand that while she's very much like an adult when she's with Briar, she's really made to feel fairly young and ineffectual as a babysitter. So there's this conflict that is about to come to the fore even for her. So this idea of, really underscoring how she feels like an adult, it's about to, it's part of the collision course that we're setting. And then down a little bit lower, I love this part here. It's on the same page, 147. This is another example when we talk in part 3 about satire. This is another example of when you have a character who is satirized. So in this novel, Kelly is, because of the way that he thinks about Black people and the way that he sort of collects his Black girlfriends and his Black friends. You have this sense of him as being someone who, it would be very easy to dismiss him as just a type, and as sort of an opportunistic person who maybe has motives that are not, not above reproach. But we also know that he's funny, and so they have these, these kinds of interactions that I think are really good. So, meaning it shows intimacy. So on the bottom here, he says, "What's your boss's name again?" "Mrs. Chamberlain." Do I have to call her that? What's her first name, just in case? So this idea of do I have to call her that, it's this very nice thing too of sort of underscoring this hierarchy. So this idea of Mrs. Chamberlain it's absurd. The idea of Kelly calling her that really underscores the fact that it's a very it's an interesting choice that Alex Chamberlain has made at this point. So he says, "Do I have to call her that? What's her first name, just in case?" It's like Amira adjusted her thick black braid on her shoulder. Alex? Ellen? No, Amira put her head to his shoulder. It's Alex, but it's weird. It's like Alix. Amira, he grinned. How do you not know this? I do. It's just not what I call her. Just call her Mrs. Chamberlain. Shh. They readjusted and waited in silence. In the painful pause, Kelly once again leaned toward Amira. Is she European or something? I don't know, maybe. What do you mean, maybe? Jesus, Kelly, I don't know. She's white. Kelly laughed into the top of his coat. Okay, miss, let me kiss you before they come. So I love this idea of him trying to get to the bottom of like why she has this strange name and why Amira doesn't know it. And there is dramatic irony here, because we know that her name used to be Alex and now it's Alix, and how everybody has a different difficult time pronouncing it. And then we have this sort of boiling it down to this very nice sense of, I don't know, she's white. So there are all sorts of things happening in this short passage. And one of the things that I think is most striking is at the end, when he says, okay, miss, let me kiss you before they come. Even before the denouement, which we will discuss later, the way that he called her miss all the time just drove me crazy, as it should. I mean, as it is meant to, I believe. It's a choice that Kiley Reid makes. There's something very dismissive about it. It's underscoring their age difference, but also just it's just putting her in a position of being sort of less than. And also there's a generic kind of feel to it. Miss, anyone can be miss. And it distances Amira, and it makes her sort of a generic young woman, not in fact a person. And in fact, this is going to be a real problem that we're going to run into with Kelly, this idea of having this sort of category of woman that he is interested in, which does make you feel like he should perhaps examine what it is that he is, seeking in these women. Okay, so and then we're going to look at 169 and 170 for our last look at dramatic irony. So this is during the actual dinner party, the Thanksgiving celebration that's happening. So somebody asks how they met. This is on page 169. Kelly looked unbearably cute as he struggled, and Alex had to look into her lap. So again, this is a very good example of the narrative stance. So if Alex, she's saying that he looked unbearably cute as he struggled. So cute is a word that Alex would use, not a word, presumably, that Amira would use. She might say hot or good looking, or I'm not exactly sure what she would say, but cute does strike me as a word that Alix might use. So also her weird attraction to him, I mean, not weird, but I just found that so incriminating and yucky. So she's, in the midst of wanting to present this, sort of perfect thing, she then is also caught up not only in the surprise of him being with her babysitter, but also then being really attracted to him and wanting to sort of be flirting with him in a situation that is highly precarious. Okay, Alex had to look into her lap. I don't know if it's appropriate. He's saying that, Kelly is. Oh my God, Rachel said, they had a one-night stand. This seemed to please her greatly, and the fact that she sat next to two 4-year-olds and across from a 2-year-old did not interfere with her excitement. Don't be shy, girl, we've all been there. These two met on a one-night stand. She pointed a fork at Walter and Jody, and look at them now. So here the dramatic irony is we know that they did not, in fact, meet at a one-night stand, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, are they going to say? Like, is this going to be revealed? Around a cheek full of mashed potatoes, Jody said, really, Rach? As Walter said, here, here. We didn't have a one-night stand, Kelly said. Alex swallowed her food. She watched Kelly look at Amira. Amira examined the details of her plate. Kelly stopped cutting into a turkey leg to say, I met Amira at Market Depot when she was being held by the police. So wow, boom, you know, you have this giant revelation, and it's really kind of exciting because as the reader, you know it's coming. You know, I mean, there's this sort of this sense of like, you know how they met, and it was not a one night stand. And it's also just, it's so satisfying because it's kind of gross how this woman is so kind of excited about it. And in fact, not only did they not meet in something that's kind of, you know, these women are thinking this might be kind of racy or kind of, you know, illicit or morally, you know, untoward. And then in fact, what's happening when they actually met is something that is really ethically problematic because the security guard / police are holding this young Black woman for no reason at all. So again, this use of dramatic irony is really well done. Another thing that the structure of the novel, together with this kind of dramatic irony, allows are some really great chapter endings. So I actually am kind of a sucker for a cliffhanger. And because we have, because the way that the pacing in this novel works, the way that information is meted out over time, it's so well done. So we have these sort of cliffhangery endings that I think are really well done. And we'll just look at one example. So this is the night after Kelly and Amira have spent the night together. And on page 71, we have this. Amira gave Kelly her phone number as she snacked on popcorn, her right arm draped deliriously over her head. On the blueprint behind her, 2 streets over from where her pinky hung, was the place Kelly Copeland completely ruined Alex Murphy's senior year, back in the spring of 2000, before she became Alex Chamberlain. So this is so good. I mean, at this point, as the reader, you don't know how these worlds are going to collide. This is the first time you're sort of, you know, becoming privy to this information. And it's so well done. It also is underscoring, you know, Alex Murphy, you know, if you're thinking about the Irish immigrant experience, Alex Murphy is, you know, a relatively common name, a relatively, you know, you could look at this as like an immigrant name in some ways. And then she's going to become Alex Chamberlain. So there's this real sense of her becoming an entirely different person by dint of the changing of her name. Okay, so we've covered the structure, we've talked about dramatic irony, and we've taken a look at why some of this prose works really well. We've also talked about how well Kiley Reid meets out information and how the pacing in the novel is so great. We're going to discuss in the third part a bit of how that impacts the plot in ways that are really important. We're going to look at the denouement. We're going to take a look at how well the plot really makes for this very, I think, satisfying ending. We're going to talk about race and class, and we are going to look at the close of the novel. We're also going to look at just a couple of examples of things that I think Kiley Reid, in addition to having a few too many, you know, lists of details, there are a couple of other little quibbles that I have with the prose that I think are small, and certainly did not bother the vast majority of readers. But I like to, you know, I need to level criticism where I can, where I see it, because I got to maintain my credibility, got to show you guys what's what. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me for part 2 of this 3-part session, and join us for part 3, and happy reading. Listeners, readers, welcome to part 3 of our 3-part lecture on Kiley Reid's really outstanding Such a Fun Age. Okay, today during this 3rd part of the lecture, we're going to talk about satire, we're going to talk about race and class, and then we're going to talk about the denouement, the climax, and the sort of aftermath, and finally we will look at the close of the novel. Those of you who are watching on the YouTube channel and can see me in front of some of my many stacks of books, you'll see that I'm wearing an oatmeal colored sweater, very much like the one that our pretty repugnant Alex Chamberlain wears Mine I'm wearing partially as a nod to our friend Alix, but also because I made it myself. So I'm wanting to show it off to all of you. So we're gonna dive right into first and foremost the satire. So I love satire. I'm a fairly cynical person in lots of ways, and I love satire in media, especially when it's well done. Satire is just pointing out societal ills in order to, well, usually in order to make them better, in order to kind of right some sort of ethical or moral or other kind of fault that a given person sees. In lots of ways you can do this. One is to exaggerate, one is to choose certain details over other details, and all of that, the goal of all of these things is to inspire criticism. But the very best satire incorporates another element, which is to make sure that the character is round enough. This is not a type that is so identifiably repugnant right from the jump that we can't relate to it at all. So the best satire, of course, is satire that you can relate to a little bit, and that characters who seem real and round and nuanced, not just terrible people. So we're going to take a look at page 127. So this is a nice look at, again, our Alix right from the start, when we first hear her writing away to get all of her Luna bars and her moisturizers and scented candles. She's pretty dislikable. And then every once in a while we have moments where we either have great sympathy with her, or maybe not great sympathy, but we have some sympathy. And then we have, some very concrete moments, particularly about how Amira feels about her, that also inspire a little bit more sympathy or respect. So on the bottom of page 127 here, the setting here is that Mrs. Chamberlain has just decided that, largely because it's not convenient for her, that her daughter Briar does not need to go to the dance class, and Amira had really been looking forward to doing it. Amira couldn't tell if her annoyance with Mrs. Chamberlain came from the ingrained tuckered standard within her, you start something, you finish it, or if it was mostly to do with missing out on dressing up with Briar. Or maybe it had to do with the fact that Amira had witnessed Mrs. Chamberlain being an outstanding mother, and was realizing that when she wasn't being one, it was by choice rather than default. So again, it's actually a criticism that that she is leveling here. She's saying that, she sort of chooses to be a good mom, but isn't a good mom all the time, which, frankly, who is a good mom all the time? But there is this idea that her default is not the problem. It's that she's sort of choosing not to do it. In the middle of the next page, it says, she could be genuinely congratulatory when Briar successfully pressed the button on the stroller's seatbelt, or when Catherine almost waved bye-bye, but only in moments when she truly felt like it. So again, the criticism here is that that's not her default, but there is also this sense that she really can be a good mother, so that helps to sort of round her out and not make her just a totally abhorrent kind of villain type. Another way that the satire, I think, works well here is that it's not just satire of the white community. So you have on page 129, it's actually right across the way here. It says, Zara had two sisters, one of whom struggled with anorexia and the other with depression, two conditions that Amira's mother believed Black people didn't get. One of the best things I think Kiley Reid does with her satire is it's a very effective way to look at racism and classism. So one of the things that I like, the racism in the novel, some of it's really on the nose, but some of it is also fairly subtle in some ways. Of course, you have with Alix and Amira, that dynamic from the beginning is really pretty terrible. Alix has no interest in her until she decides that she really wants to sort of use her in lots of different ways. And then we have the racism of Alix's husband, for example, when he has that reaction to the promposal on the television. We have this idea of Kelly fetishizing Black people. So you have all of these different types of racism that I think are really well explored in lots of ways, and lots of subtle and unsubtle ways. And of course, you have the overt, incident that sort of begins the whole book, which is this idea that Amira as a young Black woman, is kidnapping essentially the child that she happens to be babysitting. Okay, so one of the examples I wanted to look at quickly is this idea of Kelly fetishizing Black people, because I think Kiley Reid does such a good job of that. There's a lot of humor, and we won't have a lot of time to talk about humor in general, but there are lots of parts of this book that are very funny. So we're gonna take a quick look at 64, page 64 here. So right kind of in the middle of the page, Amira is out with her friends at a club. Around 11 p.m., Kelly arrived with 4 friends, and these friends, to Amira's indisputable surprise, were all Black. Kelly looked like he was being filmed for the intro of an extremely problematic music video. I love that. An extremely problematic music video is so good. So there are lots of, this is one of the main sort of points in the book, and one of the kind of plot pieces of the book is whether or not Kelly is fetishizing Black people. And in fact, he is. We know at the end, there's a very clear, when Amira is essentially replaced at the third part with another girl, which Gross, he also calls Miss. There is kind of this notion that there's something that he is doing that is fetishizing Black people. But another thing that I think she does very well is she also is showing tension within community. So it's not, the racism that she's talking about is not strictly white people being racist about Black people. Okay, at the bottom of 64, down at the bottom of the page. Oh, Josefa started to laugh and pointed at Zara. "'Cause you went home with redhead guy from Shawnee's party?" Shawnee remembered this and said, "He was so nice." Zara placed a hand on her chest. "Apparently, I can't swirl, but you can. You get a leather jacket and you better than everybody." Okay, Amira laughed. "I get it. I'm sorry. But you know what I mean. That guy you fucked with had a compass tattoo." "That boy went down for a whole EP." Zara twirled one of her twists in her hands. "I ain't seen or care about no tattoos." So there is so much excellent work that's happening here. One is this idea of swirling, which is a term I did not know, but you can imagine a chocolate and vanilla swirled soft serve cone. But this idea of Amira as swirling, and this is something that is somewhat contentious within the community of these young women of color. So it's very well done because it's light and it's sort of jesting, but it's getting at this idea of sort of a reverse racism that they're all very aware of. And then I like this part too. So satire often will kind of mention or trade on or like build on cliche. And there is sort of a known cliche or truism or however you want to think about it. I don't know about this particularly well, that Black men are not interested in giving cunnilingus, that's not really something that in the Black male community is enjoyed a lot. So this notion here that this white man was really very satisfying to her sexually is speaking to this cliche about the two groups of men. And then down at the bottom on 65, we have a whole slew of really interesting racial comments just in these 3 pages, racially nuanced comments. So down at the bottom here, Josefa says, "I mean, he's real cute or whatever, but does someone want to tell me why all his friends are Black?" Amira, Zara, and Shawnee rolled their heads toward their friend. Amira put her fist under her chin. "I don't know, Sefa, why are yours?" "First of all, rude." Josefa put her hand in Amira's face. "Second of all, I just got my 23andMe results back and I'm 11% West African. Thank you very much." Zara scrunched up her face and asked, "Why are you trying to play one-drop rule right now?" "And third of all," Josefa said, "I'm serious. I hope he doesn't have a fetish or something." So it's a really important introduction. So the girls, Josefa, who is, apparently 11% West African, but she's also of Latinx roots. So she is essentially not a Black person who is hanging around with Black people. So there's this question of hypocrisy that is really well done here, because it's not particularly troublesome for the 3 of them, but there are other instances of hypocrisy in the book and elsewhere that are far more problematic. There are also really overt examples of racism. First of all, the assault that happens at the Market Depot, But then on page 108, we realize that in fact was certainly not Alix's first brush with this kind of racism. So on 108 here, on top of trespassing, Robbie Cormier was taken in drunk off PBRs. Took me a while to realize, I think that's a Pabst Blue Ribbon. Drunk off PBRs and with a tiny bag of cocaine in a zipped cargo pants pocket. The combination of a popular black student athlete arrested on property that had plantation columns standing out front did not pan out well for Alex Murphy. A bit further down, Robbie got his scholarship taken away because you got him arrested, so good job. This wasn't the worst of it. Which, that is such a crazy sentence, because that is the worst of it. I mean, the fact that this poor black kid was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that this awful white woman, called the police and had his scholarship revoked was the worst. But this is this is a very good example of the kind of racism that is subtly evoked here, because it's Alex's point of view in this section of the novel, and she says, that wasn't the worst of it. That summer, Alex and her sister were referred to in public and private as new money trash. So here we have this sort of one of the many examples of classism in the book, which we don't have enough time to really dig into that. But there's so much good, analysis and examples of really harsh classism throughout this novel. And in this case, the fact that they're referred to that is said to be kind of worse in Alex's perspective than the fact that this kid has his scholarship revoked. So this idea, this wasn't the worst of it, is the kind of subtle racism that is coupled with this more obvious racism. One of the examples of classism that I wanted to talk about is by Tamra. So when you first meet Tamra and you first meet all of the friends of Alex, it's really interesting how they are described, because Kiley Reid goes to some lengths to not describe anyone's skin tone, which is kind of the way it's the way it should be, certainly, unless it's a very salient point. But there are times where I feel like writers go to such lengths to not point out any skin tone that they have to sort of do all of these workarounds. So on page 43 here, Jody was a children's casting director who had 2 redheaded children. So there we're assuming that this is a white woman, which is that's not totally, I think 2 redheaded children, you could have, darker skinned children that have red hair. But I think that we're meant to ascertain from a bunch of different details that in fact, that she is white. Rachel, proudly Jewish and Japanese, managed a firm that designed book covers. So this is interesting to me because the fact that she's proud of these things, proudly Jewish and Japanese, it speaks to the fact that it's okay to list them because she's proud of these elements, but also the fact that Jewish, it's an interesting thing what you can name as somebody being proudly. You could certainly say proudly black or proudly Latina or whatever the thing is, but proudly Jewish and Japanese are, obviously religious and nationality or national heritage. So it doesn't, we're not talking about race specifically here, which is, it's just interesting the way that she is describing these people. Then in the middle of this paragraph, we are introduced to Tamra. And Tamra was the principal of a private school in Manhattan. Tamra had 2 girls with inch-long black afros, a 2.5-year-old and a fully literate 4-year-old who spoke beginner French. Tamra's children referred to her as Memmy. So this is right from the start. Tamra is actually very easy to lampoon. Also, the fact that she and again, this is one of those examples of not lionizing all black people and criticizing all white people. Tamra herself is really pretty terrible. The first clue is that she is the principal of a private school in Manhattan. So there's this very kind of elitist thing right from the start. And then the fact that she is really this like aggressive mom who really believes in achievement because her girls are, already learning French, which is also kind of an elitist language. There are lots of different overtones right from the start. But the daughters with the 1-inch afro, that's kind of the only indication that we have that Tamra is black. But on page 176, we kind of see the ways in which her classism and her elitism and her sort of drive as a mother really becomes problematical. Okay, so we're gonna problematical? What did I just say? Okay, 176 on the bottom. I love this because, gosh, Amira, I have not said this enough. I don't think I've said it a single time. Amira is such a likable character. I mean, you just kind of love everything about her. And one of the things that you really like about her is her self-doubt. There's a sort of writing adage that is, if you want a reader to love your character, you should show all of your characters' foibles, all of their weaknesses. Nobody is going to like a character that is just all about, why they're so great. So this notion of showing a character's weakness is very much a part of the reason why I think Amira is so appealing. So on the bottom of 176 here, Tamra is peppering our poor Amira with questions. What was your GPA at Temple? Tamra asked. Oh, not awesome, Amira said. She set her fork and knife at the side of her plate. Like a 3.1? Okay, Tamra nodded slowly. So grad school may be out. But you know what, Amira? There are plenty of other options that will surprise you. So this is condescending. She's making all sorts of assumptions about what Amira would want. Right across the way on page 177, their conversation continues. Tamra says, how old are you, honey? Again, condescending with this kind of pet name, a little dismissive, certainly superior. How old are you, honey? Briar hiccuped again. Amira said, I'm 25. Okay, we gotta hustle, don't we? What's the big goal for you? So again, there's this really snotty, really aggressive element of really wanting Amira to succeed and wanting her, assuming that she has to have a big goal and she has to have some sort of real, tangible, demonstrable sign of success, and success that is very narrowly defined. So you've got this woman who is Black and who is with this younger Black woman, but they are really, in terms of class and in terms of what they value, they're really coming from very different angles, which again is, I think, one of the real strengths of this book, because it's easy to, to lampoon this Tamra, because frankly, she's so awful, but it also points out all of these other excellent, important elements about race and class. Okay, I want to talk briefly about some of the elements in this novel that I felt like maybe Kiley Reid could have just maybe taken just a little more time editing. Is that a diplomatic way of saying it? So very briefly, I discussed the fact that I think sometimes we have a little bit too many examples of details that are all sort of stacked up in a row. They're often very well chosen, but it seems a little bit like a shorthand that doesn't quite, it just takes me out of the text. It's a little jarring, it feels a little bit excessive, and sometimes I'm wondering about the significance of each one of the details, especially when they're all in a bit of a deluge. But one of the things that I found more troublesome is, and there were so many examples of this, is things that people were doing with their bodies in the text that I had such a hard time envisioning. And things were described, things like, Tamra moved her mouth to the side, or there are just these sort of descriptions of physical gestures that did not make sense to me. So one of them is on page 214. Amira was kneeling in front of Briar, and Alex's chest seemed to expand all the way up to her eyes. So what she's describing is she felt good, or she felt tender, or she had some sort of tender feelings about this scene. But this idea of her chest seemed to expand all the way up to her eyes, it was so awkward to me. So we can also look at page 180. This is when Alex is remembering Kelly. She could only stare at the same hand that used to hold the underside of her jaw after varsity games and co-ed scrimmages. I still don't know what that means. Whose hand holds the underside of her jaw? It's like, I can't understand why anybody would do that in what context. And then on page 231, this will be the last one. So this is again Alex, although Alex is not the only one that has all of these different descriptions of strange things happening to her body. In this case, on 231, Alex says, "It was as if all of her organs rushed up and squeezed into the space around her ears." I just don't get it. So there, you know, in the 3/4 of the MFA program I did, one of the sort of debates that I would often get caught in the middle of is this question of like, do you want to describe what's happening in the body of a character or do you not? And my sense is that you shouldn't have to do that, because whatever the circumstance that the person finds themselves in, the reader should be able to understand that well enough to sense that thing. They shouldn't have to be told, you know, that her organs felt like they were up by her ears. And I think generally those descriptions are a little tricky, or they're cliche. It's things like, you know, your stomach dropping. And if you try to avoid those, or your blood running cold, when you try to avoid those, it often can be very awkward. So I think maybe one of Kiley Reid's professors at the Iowa workshops, which is an incredibly esteemed program and where she did very, very well, maybe one of them was really into the idea of her describing a lot of somatic detail, what her characters were experiencing in their bodies, what their mouths were doing when they were talking, that sort of thing. But that was one of the elements that didn't quite work out for me, as well as some of the others of the book. So last, before we look at the very end of the novel, I want to talk about the sort of climax and denouement. So I talked in the very beginning, I alluded to the fact that the plotting of this book is really outstanding. And again, plot is not something that I usually care about. It's not something that I'm usually tracking. But she did such a good job, because I didn't feel lost and I wasn't like, oh my God, wait, what happened then? Or why is this thing happening? It was so well done because it was very well earned. You know, everything was well developed. But so we have this sort of climax and this denouement that happens at the end, where basically Alex uses Lainey, the co-anchor of her husband Peter, to post the video in order to make it look like Kelly had posted the video. So she's essentially trying to get between Kelly and Amira in order to break them up. Of course, you have her as succeeding, and in fact, there's that excellent thing where Amira says that technically Mrs. Chamberlain had won because she broke up with Kelly, you know, using a remix of the breakup line that Kelly gave to Mrs. Chamberlain, or Alex back in the day. And we also see her as somewhat victorious because she lands this job at the new school, and she's going to get to feel like a professional woman, and she's going to get to spend time in New York. And so really, in lots of ways, Alix is sort of victorious, which is really, you know, you can feel conflicted about that. And then we have Amira, who at that point we think is kind of stuck in this babysitting job. She has been promoted, so now we know that she's going to have you know, benefits, and she's going to have a slightly better salary, and there is a sense of her as being more appreciated. So she's not, you know, things are a little bit better for her, but it doesn't feel like quite enough of an evolution. So then Alex is sort of covering her tracks by going on television and setting straight what happened that night when the egg/rock was thrown through the window and Amira was accosted and held at the Market Depot store. So of course, while this is happening, and you know, we have Lainey setting up this live television thing that's going to happen, Zara overhears Lainey and Alix talking about Alix's guilt, that she feels badly about having done this terrible thing. So Zara, who's awesome, goes in and says to Amira, you cannot work here. And essentially, while they're in the bathroom together, Zara negotiates a front desk job at Greenpeace for Amira, which then ends up leading to much better things. But I want to look specifically at 284 and 285, just to kind of revel in like an example of kind of a big climax, and sort of like a very classic, like all of these different smaller rising action, you know, sort of peaks are moving along until we have this really climactic moment. So it's live television, and Lainey is sort of wanting Amira to really just, let loose on this security guard / police person at Market Depot. So in the middle of the page here, she says, do you want to prosecute this person, essentially? And Amira says, oh, no. Amira shook her head casually as if she were refusing dinner after a large meal. Again, because this kind of casual racism is not new to her. I was pretty upset, but now I'm more mad that this video got out without my permission. So again, we have this excellent dramatic irony because we know that she knows, but Alex doesn't know. So, we are very nicely aligned with Amira at this point. I didn't want that at all. And whoever released it obviously doesn't really care about consent. And I think that is a pretty sad thing. It's so well done. This is sort of this nice combination of the dramatic irony and of all of the sort of different strands are all being braided together. At the top of the next page, Amira, and this is now Alex speaking. Amira embodies much of the spirit in my business Let Her Speak, she said. Not only did she stick up for herself, but she listens to herself. And this is exactly the kind of person Peter and I want around our girls, especially at this important time of their lives. So in lots of ways, this is somewhat sincere. Amira does stick up for herself, and she has broken up with Kelly, who was not great. So in lots of ways, this is it's a good assessment. But this idea too about this is the kind of person. It's as if there's a certain type, and she's being sort of commodified here. And then Lainey says, and I hear that Amira will be around a lot more often in the new year. Lainey looked for confirmation from both Amira and Alex as you continue to write your first book. So I mentioned this section in particular because it's so opportunistic. So not only is Alex attempting to assuage her guilt here, but she's also getting this fat plug for this dumb book that she's writing. So, but then, as the tensions are kind of rising and we're frankly just hating her more and more, we have down at the bottom of this section here, Amira says, well, no, I don't really have any advice because Amira exhaled upward and several strands of her bangs fluttered in her breath. I will actually not be joining the Chamberlains full time, or at all. So I love this because then, of course, we have this denouement. But what I liked best is that on page 294, I think we could have guessed that things might unfold in this way. But then there was this sort of this second kind of concluding thought that I really appreciated. I really loved this and felt like it was well earned, but something that I hadn't expected. So on 294 here, Amira is sort of assessing the whole situation with Mrs. Chamberlain. Amira stared up at the foyer chandelier. In that moment, Mrs. Chamberlain going into her email and releasing a private video seemed like the least of her or Mrs. Chamberlain's problems. Amira understood that if Mrs. Chamberlain had a video of herself being mistreated, she'd want someone to release it for her too. There was no way of convincing Mrs. Chamberlain that what she had done had actually not been for Amira. However, this was a chance, Amira's last one, to suggest that Mrs. Chamberlain do something for someone else. Amira reached behind her back and secured the other strap onto her left arm. So right now it's probably whatever because she's only 3, she said, but you gotta act like you like Briar once in a while before she really figures it out. So I was so struck by this because I had been sensing, her Alex's preference of Catherine over Briar, but I don't think I had sort of crystallized it in quite this way. And it's such an astute and mature thing for Amira to have recognized this and to have understood, how detrimental this was going to be for Briar. And then there's also that idea of her actually speaking out to someone who is very, condescending and opportunistic and terrible to her in lots of ways. So, and who has just, really performed a pretty significant betrayal. So there's this nice sense here of Amira really as sort of coming into her own and recognizing something that's very significant. Okay, we're now going to move to the very end of the book on page 305. And I loved this. So, this is when we know she sees Kelly and he's walking with the other person the other black woman who he's calling Miss, which is so gross and terrible. And then we have this kind of second follow up where she is seeing Briar, who is now 4 years old. Amira watched Briar come down off her tiptoes and take a look around. Behind her, 2 black nannies were pushing strollers with sleeping babies inside. Amira watched Briar go straight up to one, lift her hand, and pat the closest woman's thigh. "Excuse me, nice lady?" she asked. "Can you help me reach my pumpkin?" The nanny seemed greatly amused, as if she hadn't been called nice lady in years. She said, "Sure, which one is yours?" Amira wished that she'd walked a little faster, that Briar could have called her the same name, that she could have talked to Briar without Mrs. Chamberlain just one more time. And then she felt her heart crush even further into her stomach as Briar pointed up at a bright green pumpkin and said, "It's this one." Amira held her breath as she put her head down and walked around the nannies, Briar, Mrs. Chamberlain, and Catherine. She heard Briar tell the woman thank you, and Mrs. Chamberlain laugh and apologize for her daughter. So it's really a sad ending in lots of ways. At one point, Amira says that she can feel good about Briar becoming a self-sufficient person because she's not going to have her mother, sort of cathected to her. But it is sad because you have Briar looking to someone who is deeply familiar, these black women who are taking care of babies, which is something that she would have known from Amira. And then Mrs. Chamberlain laughing and apologizing for her, when really Mrs. Chamberlain should be apologizing for the fact that she is not paying enough attention to Briar and is paying all of her attention to Catherine. I'm just realizing that I read that as if the last paragraph here in the book did not exist. So if you're looking at the YouTube channel, you can see that I have drawn an X through that final paragraph after the space break. So another kind of rule of thumb that we learned during my MFA program is that oftentimes you want to you want to take out any last sentence, often an entire last paragraph, because the writer's sort of urge is to over-explain or to kind of go one step further than they should. So there is a whole other paragraph, and it was actually extra jarring to me because it's at the very, very bottom of the page. So I was expecting to turn the page and have it continue. So not only did it feel superfluous, it also was very abrupt. So it says, deep into her 30s, Amira would wrestle with what to take from her time at the Chamberlain house. Some days she carried the sweet relief that Briar would learn to become a self-sufficient person. And some days, Amira would carry the dread that if Briar ever struggled to find herself, she'd probably just hire someone to do it for her. So I felt like that last part was totally not necessary. In fact, I felt like it kind of eroded this idea of Mrs. Chamberlain laughing and apologizing for her daughter. That, to me, was a masterful end to the book. And this kind of, leap way into the future. And then it just, for some reason, the idea of she'd probably hire someone to do it for her. I understand what Kiley Reid is trying to do here. It's this notion of she was hired to do something that Mrs. Chamberlain should have done. But it to me, that's a smaller issue than this kind of bigger, like very compelling portrait of an entire group of people who have a very complex working relationships and other relationships. So thank you so much for reading Such a Fun Age with me. I really enjoyed digging into this bestseller and was thoroughly convinced that Kiley Reid is, somebody we should really be watching. So, but to look at other titles, head to thefoxedpage.com, and I hope to see you soon. Readers, thank you so much for tuning in today. The lectures really are the lifeblood of the Foxed Page, but you should really go to thefoxedpage.com. There are 5-minute recommendations where I will predict in about 5 minutes whether you should or should not tackle Ulysses, or maybe why you shouldn't be so snobby about the recent Leanne Moriarty beach read. There are also talks, no rereading required, on old favorites like Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, or Frog and Toad, which is quite frankly a literary masterpiece. There's also this very cool thing where you answer a couple of questions and this cool wheel spins around and spits out a recommendation that I think might be exactly what you need, and it might be something that stretches you a little bit. Come and check out thefoxpage.com. Thanks for listening, and mostly, happy reading.